Hello there and welcome to Biology with Charles, where science settles down for the evening and even the busiest parts of the body get a chance to be understood slowly. Tonight, we are turning our attention to a system that almost never gets the spotlight, even though it has been quietly working for you all day and all night. Cleaning, guarding, draining and carrying. It does not thump like the heart. It does not announce itself like a cough or a yawn. Most people can go years without thinking about it at all, and yet without it, the body would struggle to keep its balance for very long. We're going to spend some time with the lymphatic system, that soft-spoken network of vessels, nodes, fluids, and watchful cells that moves through you with very little ceremony. It is the sort of system that feels almost shy. If the cardiovascular system is a highway full of constant motion and bright traffic, the lymphatic system is more like a quieter set of service roads behind the main streets, carrying what needs to be returned, inspected, or cleared away. It is less famous, less dramatic, and in some ways more mysterious, simply because it does so much without asking for attention. That makes it perfect for an evening like this, when we're not in a rush and can afford to notice the things that usually go unmentioned. Before we get into it, I would love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. There is something fitting about thinking about the body's quiet inner flow while the day outside is slowing down too. And if this gentle little journey into biology helps you unwind, or if you simply enjoy learning about the body in this calmer way, I would be very grateful if you liked the video and subscribed. It helps this peaceful corner reach more people who might need a softer landing at the end of the day. Now, get comfortable, let your thoughts loosen a little, and we'll begin with the simple fact that your body is never standing still, even when you are. Beneath the skin, around the organs, between the cells, there is movement. Not loud movement, not the obvious rise and fall of breath or the steady beat in the chest, but smaller movement. Constant, necessary, and mostly unnoticed. Part of that movement belongs to blood, but part of it belongs to something else, something many people only hear about in passing. Lymph. To understand the lymphatic system, it helps to start not with the system itself, but with the spaces around your cells. We often picture the body as if everything is neatly packed together, organs beside organs, tissues snugly arranged, cells lined up like diligent workers in a factory. In reality, there is a great deal happening in the in-between. Cells are surrounded by fluid. Nutrients leave the bloodstream and move into tissues. Waste products leave cells and need to be carried away. Water shifts from one place to another. Proteins, immune cells, and signaling molecules all move through these little spaces. The body is not just a collection of solid parts. It is also a place of continuous exchange. Every time blood passes through the tiniest vessels called capillaries, some of the fluid portion of that blood is pushed out into the surrounding tissues. This is normal. It is useful. It is one of the ways oxygen and nutrients get close enough to cells to support them. But not all of that fluid returns directly back into the bloodstream. Some of it remains in the tissues for a time. If this happened without any follow-up plan, you would begin to swell fairly quickly. Fluid would accumulate, waste would linger, proteins would drift where they should not remain. The space between cells would become crowded and chemically messy. The lymphatic system is part of the body's answer to that problem. Its job, at the most basic level, is to collect excess fluid from tissues and return it to the bloodstream. That sounds simple, and in one sense it is. But even that one task is incredibly important. Imagine a quiet clean-up crew moving through the body, collecting what has spilled into the tissue spaces and bringing it back into circulation. That is one piece of the story. Another piece is defense. As this fluid is collected and moved, it can be checked for signs of trouble. Bacteria, viruses, damaged cells, foreign particles, even early signs of disease can be noticed in this moving stream. So the lymphatic system is not just drainage, it is also surveillance. This is why it helps to think of the lymphatic system as both a transport network and a monitoring network. It drains, it filters, it alerts, it supports immunity and fluid balance at the same time. The fluid it carries is called lymph. Lymph begins as interstitial fluid, which is the fluid that surrounds the cells in your tissues. Once that fluid enters the tiny lymphatic vessels, it gets a new name. At that point, it is lymph. The difference is less about what the fluid is made of and more about where it is and what route it has entered. It is a bit like rainwater becoming stream water once it enters a channel. The liquid is still water, but now it is part of a system with a direction. Lymph is usually clear or pale. It does not look as dramatic as blood because it does not contain large numbers of red blood cells. But it can contain white blood cells, proteins, fats, cell debris, and many of the substances that need to move out of tissue spaces and be handled properly. In certain parts of the body, especially after fat absorption in the digestive system, lymph can look milky because it carries fat-rich particles. We will get to that later on. For now, it is enough to understand that lymph is a working fluid. It is not waste in the simple sense. It is part cleanup, part transport, part immune messenger. The vessels that carry lymph begin very small. They start as microscopic blind-ended capillaries in the tissues. Blind-ended simply means they begin as tiny little dead-end openings, rather than forming a loop like blood capillaries do. This shape is useful because it allows fluid from the tissues to enter them. Their walls are thin and slightly more permeable than blood capillaries, which helps them take in fluid, proteins, and larger particles that blood capillaries are less suited to reabsorb. These tiny lymphatic capillaries are scattered throughout much of the body, quietly collecting excess fluid as it appears. Once lymph enters these capillaries, it moves into larger and larger lymphatic vessels. These vessels, much like veins, often contain valves that help keep the fluid moving in one direction. That matters because the lymphatic system does not have a central pump as forceful as the heart. Blood has the heart to keep it moving under pressure. Lymph has no such luxury. It depends on other kinds of movement. Skeletal muscles squeezing during ordinary motion help push lymph along. Breathing changes pressure in the chest and encourages flow. Smooth muscle in the vessel walls can contract gently. Nearby artery pulsations can help. Even shifting position in bed contributes a little. So the lymphatic system is a wonderfully practical arrangement. It borrows motion from the rest of the body. That means movement matters more than many people realize. When you walk, stretch, breathe deeply, or simply use your muscles during the day, you're not only moving your limbs, you're also helping lymph move through its vessels. The body, in this way, is efficient. One action serves several systems at once. As lymph travels, it often passes through lymph nodes. These are small, bean-shaped structures found in clusters in places such as the neck, armpits, chest, abdomen, and groin. If the vessels are roads, lymph nodes are checkpoints. They are places where the fluid is filtered and inspected. Inside them are immune cells ready to respond if something suspicious is present. A virus, a bacterium, a foreign protein, a damaged cell fragment, all of these can be trapped and examined there. This is why lymph nodes may swell when you are sick. They are not swelling for decoration. They are becoming active. Immune cells are multiplying. Signals are being exchanged. Defensive work is underway. A sore throat may be followed by tender nodes under the jaw. An infection in the arm may be associated with swelling in the armpit. It is not always comfortable, but it is often a sign that the body has noticed a problem and is organizing its response. That detail alone gives the lymphatic system a certain quiet dignity. It is not just tidying the body, it is standing watch over it. The more you look at biology, the more you notice that the body loves overlap. Systems do not stay politely in their own lanes. The lymphatic system touches circulation, immunity, digestion, and tissue maintenance all at once. It interacts with bone marrow where many immune cells originate. It connects with the spleen, which helps monitor the blood and recycle old blood cells. It relates to the thymus, especially earlier in life where certain immune cells mature. It includes lymphoid tissues in the tonsils, intestines, and other surfaces where the body meets the outside world. So although we call it a system, singular, it is really more like a broad alliance of structures and functions built around fluid recovery and immune defense. People often know the immune system as a concept before they know the lymphatic system by name. They think of white blood cells, antibodies, fever, inflammation, and fighting infection. What they may not realize is how much of that immune activity depends on lymphatic structures. Immune cells do not simply float around at random like confused tourists. They circulate, they patrol, they gather in strategic locations, they communicate through tissues and fluids. The lymphatic system is one of the great meeting routes and inspection routes of the immune world. There is also something reassuring in the fact that your body does not wait passively for danger to spread everywhere before reacting. It samples, it checks, it filters, it keeps stations along the route. It behaves less like a fortress with one big wall and more like a landscape with many watchposts. That is a very different kind of protection. More flexible, more distributed, more constant. If you think about your day, it becomes almost funny how much effort the body puts into cleaning up after ordinary living. Cells use nutrients and produce waste. Tiny injuries happen and are repaired. The gut absorbs substances that must be sorted. The skin blocks an outside world full of microbes. The nose and mouth bring in air that is not always clean. Every meal, every breath, every scratch, every hour of standing or sitting alters the movement of fluids just a little. The body's not fragile exactly, but it is busy. It needs networks that can keep conditions stable while life goes on. The lymphatic system is one of those networks. It is part of what lets the rest of you be carefree. When that system is working normally, you do not tend to notice it. That is often the fate of successful biology. The systems doing the best job are the ones we rarely think about. You notice pain, you notice breathlessness, you notice a pounding heart or a blocked nose. You do not usually notice proper drainage, balanced tissue fluid, or a well-filtered lymph stream. Yet those quiet successes shape how well everything else functions. It is worth pausing on fluid balance for a moment because this can sound dry on paper and turn out to be incredibly important in real life. Your blood vessels are constantly exchanging fluid with tissues. If too much fluid stayed in the tissues, swelling would increase. A normal diffusion of oxygen and nutrients could become less efficient. Tissue pressure could rise. Healing could be affected. Comfort would certainly be affected. At the other extreme, if too much fluid stayed in the bloodstream and too little reached tissues, cells would not be supported properly. The body has to strike a balance. The lymphatic system helps maintain that balance by returning excess fluid and proteins that would otherwise build up where they should not. Proteins are especially important here. Large proteins that leak or move into tissue spaces are not easily reabsorbed directly into blood capillaries. Lymphatic vessels are much better suited to collect them. Without that recovery system, proteins would accumulate in tissues and pull even more water with them through osmotic effects, worsening swelling. So the lymphatic system is not only moving spare fluid, it is also preventing a kind of escalating water traffic problem at the tissue level. There is a subtle elegance to that. The body solves one problem before it becomes three. And then there is the matter of fats. Most nutrients absorbed from the digestive tract enter blood vessels fairly directly. But certain fats take a different route. Specialized lymphatic vessels in the small intestine, called lacteals, absorb fat-rich particles after digestion. These particles then travel through the lymphatic system before eventually entering the bloodstream. So the lymphatic system is not merely a cleanup route, it is also part of nutrient transport. Again, one system, several jobs. That idea can help correct a common misconception. Some people hear lymphatic system and assume it is mainly about swollen glands or occasional illness. In truth, it is woven into daily physiology. It helps with ordinary circulation of fluids, immune readiness, and nutrient movement. It is not a backup system. It is a regular working system. Quiet. Yes. Secondary. No. If we were giving body systems personalities, the lymphatic system would be one of those competent people who says very little in meetings and then turns out to be the reason the entire organisation still functions. It does not demand applause. It just continues taking care of the overlooked tasks that would become disasters if ignored. There is another reason this system tends to feel less familiar, and that is because it is somewhat more diffuse than something like the heart or stomach. You can point to the heart. You can point to the lungs. Even if you are wrong by a few centimetres, you still have a clear idea. The lymphatic system is harder to picture because it is spread out. It is a network. Some of its organs are discrete, like lymph nodes or the spleen. Some of its vessels are thin and subtle. Some of its tissues are embedded in other areas, like the tonsils or Peyer's patches in the intestines. So it lives partly in the imagination unless someone draws you a map. That is what we are beginning to do now. We are drawing that map slowly. At one end of the story are tissue spaces where fluid leaves the blood. Then come the tiny lymphatic capillaries collecting what remains. These lead into larger vessels. Along the way are nodes that filter and monitor. The vessels continue to merge into larger trunks and ducts until the lymph is eventually returned to the bloodstream near the large veins close to the heart. In that sense, the lymphatic system is not separate from circulation. It loops back into it. Blood becomes tissue fluid becomes lymph returns to blood. The body is full of circles disguised as lines. Once you see that, the system becomes less mysterious. Not simple exactly, but more familiar. It is part of a cycle, a recovery route, a quiet return. There is something very human about only noticing support systems when they fail. When drainage is poor, swelling becomes obvious. When immune filtering becomes overwhelmed, illness becomes obvious. When lymph nodes enlarge, people suddenly become aware that such things exist. But the far more interesting reality is that these structures were already there the whole time, working through countless ordinary days without needing a dramatic moment to justify themselves. And perhaps that is why this system lends itself so well to slow study. It reminds us that not everything important is noisy. Some functions preserve life by being steady, repetitive, and nearly invisible. The body is full of such work. Tiny corrections, quiet collections, careful inspections, biological housekeeping of the highest order. You can almost think of it as a form of patience built into the body. Fluid leaks out, and the lymphatic system gathers it. Trouble appears, and the lymphatic system samples it. Movement happens, and the lymphatic system uses that motion. Food is absorbed, and the lymphatic system helps carry part of it. Nothing theatrical, just consistent attention to the small imbalances that living creates. As we go further, we will look more closely at how lymph is formed, how vessels are arranged, how nodes filter, how immune cells use this network, and what happens when flow slows or becomes blocked. We will also spend time on the connection between lymph and fat absorption, because the digestive system always likes to join the conversation when fats are involved. But before all that detail, this opening view matters. It gives us the shape of the whole thing. The lymphatic system is the body's quiet network of return and defense. It collects excess tissue fluid, carries it as lymph through vessels, passes it through nodes where immune cells can inspect it, and eventually returns it to the bloodstream. Along the way, it helps maintain fluid balance, supports immune surveillance, and transports absorbed fats from the intestine. It has no pounding central pump, so it borrows movement from breathing, muscles, and pressure changes in the body. It is spread throughout the body, often overlooked and essential. That alone is a good place to rest the mind for a moment. Not because the story is finished, but because the outline is now in place. Somewhere beneath your skin, in your neck, your chest, your abdomen, your limbs, this network is active. It has been active throughout this entire evening. While you listened, tissue fluid continued shifting. Tiny vessels continued collecting. Immune cells continued watching. Nothing paused just because you did. and that is one of the gentler lessons in biology. Rest is never the same as inactivity. Even in stillness, the body is busy in calm and deliberate ways. There are systems that work most beautifully when they are not being noticed at all. So now that we have met the lymphatic system in broad outline, we can move a little closer and ask the next natural question. If this network is collecting fluid from around the cells, what exactly is that fluid? How does it leave the blood in the first place? And what changes when it becomes lymph? Most people grow up learning about the heart, the lungs, the stomach and the brain long before they ever hear much about the lymphatic system. That is understandable. The heart is easy to notice. It beats. The lungs rise and fall. The stomach complains when neglected. The brain gets all the headlines because it is attached to thought, memory and the occasional lost set of keys. The lymphatic system, by contrast, keeps a much lower profile. It does not announce itself with a thump or a rumble. It does not usually hurt unless something has gone wrong. It simply moves in the background day after day, doing work that is so steady and so quiet that most people could be forgiven for assuming the body manages perfectly well without it. It does not. If the circulatory system is the grand public transport of the body, with blood flowing under pressure through arteries, capillaries and veins, then the lymphatic system is the quieter network running alongside it, collecting leftovers, carrying messages, checking for danger, and helping keep the internal environment from turning into a damp and disorganized mess. It is one of those systems that becomes more impressive the longer you look at it, because it exists not for one simple purpose, but for several at once. It helps maintain fluid balance, it supports immune defense, it transports certain absorbed fats, and it does all this without a great deal of noise or self-promotion, which is rather dignified of it. To understand what the lymphatic system is, it helps to begin with a small correction to the way we often imagine the body. We tend to think of organs and tissues as if they are neatly packed together, dry and self-contained, like items in a carefully organised cupboard. In reality, the body is full of fluid. Blood moves through vessels, of course, but fluid also moves out of those vessels into the spaces around cells. Cells live bathed in a thin layer of surrounding liquid. Nutrients arrive through it. Wastes leave through it. Hormones travel through it. Immune cells move through it. In a very real sense, your cells are not sitting in emptiness. They are living in a small internal landscape of fluid exchange. Every time blood passes through capillaries, which are the tiniest blood vessels, some of the fluid portion of that blood is pushed outward into the surrounding tissues. This is not an accident. It is part of how life is supplied. Oxygen and nutrients need to get close to cells. Cells need access to raw materials and a way to send back their byproducts. So fluid leaves the capillaries and enters the tissue spaces. Some of it later returns directly to the blood vessels, but not all of it. A significant portion remains outside the blood circulation for a while, and that is where the lymphatic system enters the story. The lymphatic system is the network that collects this excess fluid from tissues and returns it to the bloodstream. That is its simplest definition, and it is already important enough. Without such a recovery system, fluid would build up in tissues, swelling would increase, proteins and waste materials would accumulate in the wrong places, the spaces around cells would become less stable and less useful. The body likes balance, and the lymphatic system is one of the main reasons that balance can be maintained. The fluid collected by this system is called lymph. Before it enters lymphatic vessels, it is generally referred to as interstitial fluid, which simply means the fluid in the spaces between cells. Once it enters the lymphatic capillaries, it becomes lymph. The fluid itself does not undergo some dramatic transformation at the border. It is not like water turning into tea. The name changes because it has entered a different route and now belongs to a different transport system. That route matters because from that moment on, the fluid is not only being carried back toward the blood, it is also being watched. And this brings us to the second major reason the lymphatic system exists. It is not just a drainage network, it is also part of the immune system, As lymph moves through lymphatic vessels, it passes through lymph nodes and other lymphoid structures where immune cells can inspect what it contains. This is one of the clever things about the body. It does not merely collect spare fluid and send it back without asking questions. It uses that fluid as an information source. If bacteria have entered a tissue, if viruses are present, if damaged cells have broken apart, if foreign particles have slipped past a barrier, the lymphatic system can help bring evidence of that trouble to places where immune responses can begin. So the lymphatic system exists because the body has at least two very practical needs. First, it needs a way to recover excess tissue fluid and return it to the circulation. Second, it needs a way to sample what is happening out in the tissues and mount a defense when necessary. A body that could do only one of those jobs would be at a disadvantage. A body that can do both through one interlinked system is being efficient in the way biology often is. If you picture the blood vessels as the delivery side of a city, the lymphatic system is partly the drainage service and partly the inspection service. It clears the streets, but it also checks the packages. It is not glamorous perhaps, but it is the sort of thing you miss terribly when it fails. The structure of the lymphatic system reflects these jobs. It begins with tiny lymphatic capillaries scattered through many tissues of the body. These vessels are very small, with thin walls that allow fluid, proteins and certain particles to enter. Unlike blood capillaries, they do not form a complete loop from one larger vessel to another. They begin as blind-ended little channels, which makes them ideal for collecting fluid from the spaces around cells. Once the fluid enters, it is now lymph, and it moves into larger lymphatic vessels. These vessels, in many ways, resemble veins more than arteries. They carry fluid at relatively low pressure, and often contain valves to keep that fluid moving in one direction. The direction matters because lymph is ultimately being guided back toward the bloodstream, where it will re-enter near the large veins close to the heart. But unlike blood, lymph has no central pump of its own. There is no lymph heart thumping away in the chest. Instead, lymph moves because the body moves. Skeletal muscles squeeze nearby vessels. Breathing changes pressure in the chest and abdomen. Smooth muscle in the walls of some lymphatic vessels contracts gently. Even the pulsing of nearby arteries can help. So the lymphatic system exists not as an isolated machine, but as a network that cooperates with motion already happening elsewhere in the body. That detail is worth noticing because it reveals something very practical. The body does not always solve problems by inventing a whole new engine. Sometimes it builds a system that can borrow force from existing activity. Your walk to the kitchen, your stretch in bed, your breathing while you sleep, all of these help lymph move. It is a resourceful design, quiet but not lazy. Along the roots of these vessels sit lymph nodes. These are small, bean-shaped structures that act as filters and meeting points for immune cells. They are found in many parts of the body, often clustered in places such as the neck, armpits, chest, abdomen, and groin. Lymph flows through them, and within them immune cells stand ready to recognize trouble. If a harmful microorganism or suspicious material is present, the node may become more active. Immune cells may multiply. Signals may be exchanged. The node may enlarge, which is why swollen lymph nodes often accompany infection. People sometimes call lymph nodes glands, though that is not technically accurate. They are not secreting a product in the way a salivary gland or thyroid gland does. They are more like filtering stations and immune outposts. The confusion is understandable, but the real identity of these nodes is more interesting anyway. They are checkpoints, not faucets. The lymphatic system also includes a number of organs and tissues that belong to the wider lymphoid world. The spleen is one of the most important. It filters blood rather than lymph, but it plays a major role in immune function and the handling of old blood cells. The thymus is especially important earlier in life for the maturation of T lymphocytes, a crucial type of immune cell. The tonsils help monitor material entering through the mouth and nose. Lymphoid tissue in the digestive tract helps guard one of the body's busiest and most exposed internal borders. So when we talk about the lymphatic system, we are talking not only about vessels and nodes, but about a broader network of tissues involved in surveillance, defense, and fluid management. It is easy to miss how sensible this all is until you imagine life without it. Suppose fluid leaked from blood capillaries into tissues, but there were no lymphatic vessels to collect the excess. You would begin accumulating fluid in the tissues, swelling would increase, exchange between blood and cells would become less efficient. Proteins that escaped into tissues would remain there, drawing more water with them. Waste products would linger. The internal environment would become harder to regulate. Now add the immune problem. If microbes entered tissues, there would be no dedicated network bringing evidence of that invasion to lymph nodes, where immune responses could be organised. Defence would be slower, less coordinated, and more dangerous. The lymphatic system exists because ordinary living constantly creates small imbalances and risks, and the body needs a quiet way to correct them. There's also a third role that deserves attention because it surprises many people. The lymphatic system helps absorb fats from the small intestine. Most nutrients absorbed from food enter the blood quite directly, but some fats take a detour. Specialized lymphatic capillaries in the intestine, called lacteals, take up fat-rich particles after digestion. These particles then travel through the lymphatic system before entering the bloodstream. So the lymphatic system is not only a clean-up and defense network, it is also involved in nourishment. That seems only fair. After helping clear the mess and watch for trouble, it also lends a hand with dinner. This digestive role helps explain why the lymphatic system should never be treated as some minor side route of the body. It is woven into daily physiology. It matters every hour, not just when a person is sick. Tissue fluid is always shifting. Immune cells are always patrolling. The gut is always making decisions about what to absorb and where to send it. The lymphatic system exists because a living body is not tidy in a static sense. It is stable only because constant correction is underway. That may be one of the most useful ways to think about it. The body is not balanced because nothing changes. The body is balanced because systems exist to respond to change. Fluid leaves capillaries, so something must collect the excess. Microbes sometimes cross barriers, so something must inspect the tissues. Fats are absorbed in forms that need special handling, so something must transport them. The lymphatic system is part of the answer to all of that. There is also a curious emotional effect when learning about this system. People often find it unexpectedly reassuring. Perhaps that is because it reveals how much of the body's care happens without conscious effort. You do not have to remember to start your lymphatic flow in the morning. You do not have to issue instructions to your lymph nodes when you scrape your hand or catch a cold. You do not have to personally direct immune cells toward the neck when your throat is infected. The body is already organized around the likelihood of trouble. It does not wait for a formal request. This is especially clear in the way the lymphatic system is distributed. It is not centralized in a single location. It spreads through the body, reaching into tissues, collecting information, linking local events to broader immune responses. That distribution matters because the outside world can enter the body in many ways. Through the skin when damaged, through the lungs with inhaled particles, through the digestive tract with food and microbes, through mucous membranes of various kinds. A single watchtower would not be enough. The body needs many routes and many checkpoints. Even the phrase hidden rivers feels appropriate here, not because the system is mystical, but because it really does resemble an understated internal flow. Lymph moves through vessels, it pools and passes, it winds through regions that most people never think about. It returns quietly to the bloodstream after its work is done. Rivers shape landscapes even when people are not watching them. The lymphatic system shapes bodily stability in much the same way, and because it is quieter than blood circulation, its importance can be underestimated. Blood gets the colour, the drama, the emergency scenes in television hospitals. Lymph is almost colourless, modest, and less cinematic. But biology is not obliged to make its most important functions flashy. Some of the most necessary things in the body happen in calm tones. The maintenance of fluid balance is not dramatic until it fails. Immune surveillance is not exciting until an infection appears. Fat absorption seems dull until you remember that life depends on turning food into usable material. The lymphatic system is full of such understated necessities. You can also understand why it is hard to teach and picture. The heart is a pump, the lungs are chambers of breathing, the stomach is a muscular sac. These are shapes the mind can grasp. The lymphatic system is more like a web. Vessels thread through tissues, nodes sit in clusters, organs contribute from different places, functions overlap with circulation and immunity. It asks the imagination to hold a network rather than a single object. That is a bit more work, but it is worth it. Because once the picture settles in, many little medical facts begin to make more sense. Swollen nodes during illness make more sense. Fluid retention and lymphedema make more sense. The connection between movement and swelling makes more sense. The reason some cancer cells can spread via lymphatic routes makes more sense. The importance of removing or preserving lymph nodes during certain surgeries makes more sense. Even the simple advice to move, breathe deeply, and avoid long periods of complete immobility begins to sound less like vague wellness chatter and more like practical support for a fluid system with no major pump of its own. So, what is the lymphatic system in the clearest terms? It is a network of vessels, nodes, and lymphoid organs that collects excess fluid from tissues, returns it to the bloodstream, supports immune surveillance and response, and carries certain absorbed fats from the intestine. Why does it exist? Because blood circulation alone cannot handle all the fluid exchange of living tissues, because the body needs a widespread method of monitoring for infection and damage, and because digestion sends some important cargo along lymphatic routes rather than blood vessels. That is the straightforward answer, and it is already a satisfying one. But the more interesting answer is that the lymphatic system exists because life is messy in a very organised way. Cells must be fed, and feeding them creates leftovers. Tissues must be protected, and protection requires information. Food must be absorbed, and absorption is not always simple. The lymphatic system exists because a living body is always exchanging, always correcting, always watching. It is one of the systems that turns constant change into something stable enough to call health, and once you begin to see it that way, the body feels less like a collection of separate organs and more like a place where quiet cooperation is always underway. Blood delivers, lymph collects, immune cells inspect, muscles move and incidentally help fluid flow. The gut absorbs and hands off part of its cargo by a special route. No single part does everything, but together they manage the ordinary miracles of remaining alive and reasonably dry. From here, the next step is to look more closely at the fluid itself, because now that the network is in view, it makes sense to ask what exactly is moving through those vessels, how it forms in the tissues, and what it carries with it as it begins its slow return. When people think about the body's fluids, they usually picture blood first. It is easy to imagine, easy to describe, and very visible whenever something goes wrong. But blood is only one part of the story. There is another fluid, less dramatic and far less talked about, that spends most of its time outside of blood vessels, quietly surrounding your cells. It is there right now, holding each cell in place, delivering substances, carrying others away, and shifting in small but constant ways. Before it ever becomes lymph, this fluid is simply part of the environment your cells live in. To understand how lymph is formed, it helps to begin with what happens inside the smallest blood vessels. These vessels, called capillaries, are where the exchange between blood and tissues takes place. They are extremely thin, often just one cell thick, which allows substances to move across their walls. Blood arrives carrying oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and various dissolved molecules. As it flows through these narrow passages, pressure inside the capillaries gently pushes some of the fluid outward. This fluid carries dissolved substances with it, moving from the bloodstream into the surrounding tissue spaces. This outward movement is not a leak in the sense of damage. It is a normal and necessary process. Cells are not directly connected to blood vessels. They rely on nearby fluid to bring what they need close enough for exchange to occur. So this outward flow creates a kind of delivery system. Oxygen and nutrients diffuse from this fluid into the cells. At the same time, cells release waste products, carbon dioxide and other materials back into that same surrounding fluid. At this stage, the fluid is known as interstitial fluid. It occupies the small spaces between cells, filling the gaps and allowing for exchange. It is not static. It is constantly being refreshed, shifted, and replaced. Some of it moves back into the capillaries, especially on the side where blood pressure is lower and the pull of proteins inside the blood helps draw fluid back in. But that return is not complete. A portion of the fluid remains outside the blood vessels, carrying with it proteins, cellular debris, and other substances that are not as easily reabsorbed directly into the bloodstream. If nothing else happened, this leftover fluid would begin to accumulate. Over time, tissues would swell, and the delicate balance between delivery and removal would be lost. This is where the lymphatic system begins its role. Tiny lymphatic capillaries, scattered throughout many tissues, act as entry points for this excess fluid. Their structure is particularly suited for this task. They have very thin walls and are arranged in a way that allows them to open slightly when pressure outside them increases. When the amount of interstitial fluid rises, these tiny vessels can take it in. Once the fluid enters these lymphatic capillaries, it is now called lymph. The transformation is less about composition and more about context. The fluid has entered a system that will carry it away from the tissue spaces, guide it through a network of vessels, and eventually return it to the bloodstream. From this point onward, it is part of a different pathway, one that includes filtering, monitoring, and transport beyond simple fluid balance. The process of lymph formation is continuous. As long as blood is moving through capillaries, fluid is being pushed into tissues. As long as cells are active, substances are being exchanged. And as long as that happens, lymphatic capillaries are collecting what remains. There is no start and stop in the usual sense. It is a steady background process, running quietly without interruption. The composition of lymph reflects its origin. Because it begins as interstitial fluid, it contains many of the substances that have left the bloodstream or been released by cells. Water is the main component, but dissolved within it are proteins, salts, glucose, amino acids, and various metabolic byproducts. It also contains immune cells, especially certain types of white blood cells that patrol tissues and can enter lymphatic vessels as part of their movement through the body. One of the most important features of lymph is that it can carry substances that are too large to return directly to the blood through capillaries. Large proteins, for example, do not easily pass back into blood vessels once they have entered the tissue spaces. If they remained there, they would alter the balance of fluid, drawing more water into tissues and contributing to swelling. Lymphatic vessels solve this problem by collecting these proteins and returning them to circulation. In this way, the lymphatic system helps maintain not just fluid levels, but also the proper distribution of molecules throughout the body. In certain parts of the body, the composition of lymph changes in a noticeable way. The most striking example occurs in the digestive system. After a meal that contains fats, the small intestine breaks those fats down and absorbs them into specialized structures. Instead of entering the bloodstream directly, many of these fat particles are packaged into small droplets and taken up by lymphatic vessels called lacteals. These vessels are part of the lining of the small intestine and are specifically adapted for fat absorption. When lymph carries a high amount of these fat-rich particles, it takes on a milky appearance. This type of lymph is sometimes referred to as chyle. It looks quite different from the clearer lymph found in other parts of the body. As it moves through the lymphatic system, it eventually joins the bloodstream, delivering those absorbed fats to the rest of the body. This is one of the reasons the lymphatic system is essential for proper nutrition. Without it, the body would struggle to absorb and transport certain types of fats efficiently. Beyond nutrients and proteins, lymph also carries waste materials. Cells are constantly producing byproducts of metabolism. Some of these are small and easily returned to the blood. Others are larger or more complex and rely on lymphatic transport. Fragments of dead cells, damaged proteins, and other debris can all be found in lymph. This does not mean lymph is simply waste fluid. It is more accurate to think of it as a mixed cargo, containing useful substances, unwanted materials, and information about what is happening in the tissues it has passed through. That idea of information is important. Lymph does not just move substances from one place to another, it also acts as a kind of messenger. When pathogens such as bacteria or viruses enter the body, they often encounter tissue spaces before they reach the bloodstream. Lymphatic vessels collect fluid from these areas, and in doing so, they may carry those pathogens or pieces of them toward lymph nodes. There, immune cells can detect them and begin a response. This means lymph is part of an early warning system. It brings samples from the tissues to locations where immune cells are concentrated. Instead of waiting for a widespread infection, the body can begin responding based on what appears in lymph. This makes the lymphatic system not just a transport network, but also a communication route for the immune system. The flow of lymph is slower than the flow of blood. Blood is driven by the strong rhythmic contractions of the heart. Lymph moves without such a central pump. Its motion depends on several smaller forces working together. Skeletal muscle contractions play a major role. When muscles contract during movement, they press on nearby lymphatic vessels, pushing lymph forward. Valves inside these vessels help ensure that the fluid moves in one direction, rather than slipping backward. Breathing also contributes. When you inhale, the pressure inside your chest changes. This creates a gentle suction effect that encourages lymph to move toward the central vessels near the heart. Even small movements such as shifting position or stretching can influence lymph flow. This is one of the reasons prolonged immobility can lead to fluid buildup. Without movement, the assistance normally provided by muscles and breathing is reduced, and lymph may move more slowly. Smooth muscle in the walls of some lymphatic vessels can contract rhythmically, adding another layer of movement. These contractions are not as forceful as the heartbeat, but they help maintain a steady flow. In addition, the natural pulsing of nearby arteries can create slight pressure changes that assist lymph movement. All of these factors combine to create a system that is gentle but persistent. As lymph moves through larger vessels, it eventually reaches major lymphatic ducts. These ducts act as the final pathways before lymph re-enters the bloodstream. The two main ducts are the thoracic duct and the right lymphatic duct. The thoracic duct is the larger of the two and carries lymph from much of the body. It empties into a large vein near the base of the neck. The right lymphatic duct handles a smaller region, returning lymph from the upper right portion of the body. This return to the bloodstream completes the cycle. Fluid that left the blood as plasma becomes interstitial fluid, then lymph, and finally returns to the blood. Along the way, it may have delivered nutrients, collected waste, carried immune cells, transported fats, and provided information about the state of the tissues. It is a continuous loop, one that supports stability by allowing constant exchange without allowing imbalance to build. The contents of lymph can vary depending on where it comes from. Lymph from the skin may contain different substances than lymph from the digestive tract or lungs. In areas where infection is present, lymph may carry higher numbers of immune cells or microbial particles. In areas of injury, it may contain more cellular debris. This variability is part of what makes lymph useful to the immune system. It reflects local conditions and brings that information to central locations. Because lymph can carry pathogens, the lymphatic system must also be able to handle them safely. This is where lymph nodes become essential. As lymph passes through these nodes, it is filtered. Immune cells within the nodes examine its contents. Harmful organisms can be trapped and destroyed. This filtering process ensures that when lymph returns to the bloodstream, it has been checked and, if necessary, cleaned. It is interesting to consider that lymph, despite being less well known, is deeply connected to both circulation and immunity. It begins as part of the circulatory exchange, becomes a carrier of immune information, and ends by rejoining the circulation. It sits at the intersection of several major systems. This position makes it essential, even if it rarely demands attention. Another detail worth noting is that the amount of lymph formed each day is not small. Several litres of fluid can move through the lymphatic system over the course of a day. This is a substantial volume, especially when you consider how quietly it happens. There are no obvious signals, no sensations tied directly to this movement under normal conditions. It is a reminder that much of what keeps the body stable operates below the level of awareness. When the formation or movement of lymph is disrupted, the effects become more noticeable. If lymphatic vessels are damaged or blocked, fluid can accumulate in tissues, leading to swelling known as lymphedema. This can occur after certain surgeries, infections, or conditions that affect lymphatic flow. The swelling reflects the same principle that explains why the lymphatic system exists in the first place. Fluid that leaves the bloodstream must have a way to return. If that pathway is impaired, imbalance develops. Understanding how lymph is formed and what it carries helps explain many of these effects. It shows that the lymphatic system is not optional. It is part of the normal handling of fluid and materials in the body. Without it, the spaces between cells would become less controlled, and the transport of certain substances would be incomplete. There is also something quietly reassuring in the way this system works. It does not require conscious control. It does not need constant adjustment from the outside. It operates as part of the body's built-in maintenance, responding to changes as they occur. Cells release substances and lymph collects them. Fluid shifts and lymphatic vessels respond. Immune cells move, and lymph provides a route. It is a steady presence, adapting moment by moment without asking for attention. As we move forward, it becomes helpful to look more closely at the pathways that carry this fluid. The vessels themselves, their structure, their arrangement, and the way they guide lymph through the body all add another layer to the story. Because once lymph is formed, its journey is only just beginning, and the routes it takes reveal even more about how this quiet system supports the rest of the body. If you were to imagine the body as a map, with clearly marked routes for everything that moves, the blood vessels would be easy to trace. Arteries branch outward, veins return inward, and the heart sits at the centre like a busy station keeping everything in motion. The lymphatic system does not present itself quite so neatly. Its pathways are there, just as real, just as extensive, but they are softer in their presence, less defined in the way we tend to picture them, and more dependent on the surrounding landscape to do their work. The vessels of the lymphatic system form a network that runs through much of the body, beginning in the smallest corners of the tissues and gradually joining into larger and more organised channels. They are not arranged in a perfect mirror of the blood vessels, but they often follow similar routes, weaving alongside arteries and veins, sharing space, and quietly managing the fluid that the bloodstream cannot fully reclaim on its own. These vessels are not carrying something separate from the rest of the body's activity. They are part of the same continuous movement, just handling a different phase of it. At the very beginning of this network are the lymphatic capillaries. These are the smallest vessels in the system, and they are built with a specific purpose in mind. Their walls are thin and flexible, made of a single layer of cells that overlap slightly, creating tiny openings that can respond to pressure. When fluid builds up in the surrounding tissue, these overlapping edges can part just enough to allow that fluid to enter. When the pressure inside the vessel rises, they close again, helping prevent the fluid from escaping back out. This design makes them particularly good at collecting what has been left behind in the tissue spaces. Blood capillaries, for all their usefulness, are not especially good at reabsorbing large molecules or excess proteins once those have moved into the tissues. Lymphatic capillaries solve that problem. They are more permissive. They allow proteins, debris, and even larger particles to enter. In a sense, they are the body's more flexible collectors, taking in what the more selective blood vessels leave behind. Once fluid enters these capillaries, it begins a journey that will take it through increasingly larger vessels. These vessels are often described as being similar to veins, and that comparison is useful up to a point. Like veins, lymphatic vessels have valves. These valves are small, flap-like structures that open to allow fluid forward and close to prevent it from flowing backward. Because the lymphatic system operates under low pressure, these valves are essential. Without them, lymph could easily drift in the wrong direction or stall altogether. But the vessels themselves are not passive tubes. Many of them contain smooth muscle in their walls, which allows them to contract gently. These contractions are not as strong or as rhythmic as the heartbeat, but they provide a steady push, helping move lymph along its path. It is a subtle kind of motion, one that you would never feel directly, but it contributes to the overall flow in a meaningful way. Still, the most important force moving lymph is not the vessel walls themselves, it is the movement of the body. Every time you walk, your muscles contract. As they do, they press against nearby lymphatic vessels, squeezing them slightly and pushing the fluid forward. When the muscles relax, the vessels refill. The valves ensure that the fluid continues in one direction. This repeated cycle of compression and release acts like a series of gentle pumps distributed throughout the body. Breathing adds another layer to this movement. When you inhale, the pressure inside your chest decreases. This creates a kind of pull that helps draw lymph toward the central vessels. When you exhale, pressure changes again, contributing to the overall motion. Even though you're not aware of it, every breath you take is helping move lymph through its pathways. It is another example of how different systems in the body cooperate without needing to be told. There are also smaller influences at work. The pulsing of nearby arteries can create slight pressure changes that affect lymphatic vessels. Changes in body position, even something as simple as turning in bed, can shift the flow. Gravity plays a role as well, particularly in the lower parts of the body. All of these factors combine to create a system that is constantly adjusting, using whatever motion is available to keep things moving. As the lymphatic vessels grow larger, they begin to form more defined routes. These larger vessels often run alongside major blood vessels, following similar paths through the body. They pass through regions where lymph nodes are located, allowing the fluid to be filtered and inspected before continuing on its way. The arrangement is not random. It is organised in a way that ensures lymph from different regions of the body is directed through specific sets of nodes, creating a kind of regional monitoring system. For example, lymph from the arm may pass through nodes in the armpit before moving deeper into the chest. Lymph from the head and neck travels through nodes in those regions. The abdomen and lower body have their own pathways and groups of nodes. This organisation allows the immune system to respond more efficiently because it can focus on particular areas where problems might arise. Beyond the nodes, the vessels continue to merge, forming larger trunks. These trunks are the main highways of the lymphatic system, carrying fluid from broad regions of the body toward the final return points. There are several of these trunks, each responsible for draining specific areas. They eventually connect to the two main ducts of the lymphatic system. The thoracic duct is the largest and most important of these. It collects lymph from most of the body, including both legs, the abdomen, the left side of the chest, the left arm, and the left side of the head and neck. It is a long vessel, running upward through the chest, and it empties into a large vein near the base of the neck. This is where the lymph re-enters the bloodstream, completing its journey. The right lymphatic duct is smaller and handles a more limited region. It drains the upper right portion of the body, including the right arm, the right side of the chest, and the right side of the head and neck. Like the thoracic duct, it empties into a large vein, returning lymph to the circulation. These final connections are important because they close the loop. Fluid that left the bloodstream as plasma became interstitial fluid, then lymph, is now returned to the blood. The body maintains balance not by keeping everything in one place, but by allowing movement and then guiding that movement back into a stable pattern. It is worth noting how gradual this entire process is. There is no single moment where lymph suddenly rushes forward with force. It is a slow, steady progression. Fluid enters tiny capillaries, moves into slightly larger vessels, passes through nodes, joins trunks, and eventually reaches the ducts. Each step is small, but together they create a continuous flow that never really stops. This slow movement has advantages. It allows time for filtering and inspection. It reduces the risk of sudden imbalances. It ensures that the system can operate without the need for a powerful central pump. But it also means that the system depends heavily on the surrounding environment. If movement is reduced, if pressure changes are limited, if vessels are damaged or blocked, the flow can slow down. This dependence is one of the reasons why certain conditions can affect lymphatic circulation. Prolonged immobility, for example, can lead to fluid buildup because the muscle-driven component of lymph movement is reduced. Damage to lymphatic vessels or nodes, whether from injury, infection, or surgery, can disrupt the pathways and make it harder for lymph to move normally. In such cases, the quiet efficiency of the system becomes more noticeable, precisely because it is no longer working as it should. There is also an interesting relationship between the lymphatic vessels and the tissues they serve. Because the vessels are so closely integrated with the surrounding structures, they can adapt to local conditions. In areas where more fluid is produced, the vessels can expand slightly or increase their activity. In areas where less fluid is present, the flow may be slower. This flexibility allows the system to respond to changes without requiring a central command. The pathways themselves are not perfectly symmetrical or identical from one person to another. While the general arrangement is consistent, there can be variations in the exact routes and connections. This is not unusual in biology. Many systems have a basic plan with room for individual differences. The important thing is that the overall function is preserved, even if the details vary. Another aspect that often goes unnoticed is the interaction between lymphatic vessels and the immune system. As lymph moves through the vessels, it carries not only fluid and dissolved substances, but also immune cells. These cells can enter and leave the vessels, moving between tissues and lymph nodes as needed. The vessels are not just passive conduits. They are part of a dynamic environment where cells are constantly travelling, communicating and responding to signals. This movement of immune cells is essential for the body's ability to detect and respond to threats. Cells that encounter a pathogen in the tissue can travel through lymphatic vessels to reach a lymph node, where they can activate other immune cells. In this way, the pathways beneath the skin and between the organs become routes for information as much as for fluid. It is also worth considering how this system fits into the larger picture of circulation. Blood moves in a closed loop, driven by the heart. Lymph moves in a more open and distributed way, guided by pressure differences and physical movement. The two systems are connected, but they operate with different rhythms and forces. Together they create a balance between delivery and return, between pressure and permeability, between speed and inspection. The phrase, silent circulation, captures something important about this system. It is circulation, in the sense that fluid is moving through a network and returning to its starting point. But it is silent because it does not produce the obvious signals we associate with circulation. There is no pulse you can feel, no sound you can hear, no sensation that tells you it is happening. It is a background process, steady and dependable, supporting the more visible activities of the body. If you take a moment to consider how much depends on this quiet movement, it becomes easier to appreciate its role. Every cell relies on a stable environment. That environment depends on the proper handling of fluids and substances. The lymphatic vessels are part of the system that maintains that stability. They do not create the initial movement of nutrients or oxygen, but they ensure that the aftermath of that movement does not lead to imbalance. This is the kind of work that is easy to overlook because it does not draw attention to itself. It does not produce a dramatic effect when it is working well. But it is essential for the smooth functioning of the body as a whole. It is one of those systems that you might never think about until you have a reason to, and by then, it has already been supporting you for years without complaint. As we continue, it becomes helpful to look more closely at what happens when lymph reaches those filtering points along its journey. Because the vessels may carry the fluid, but it is within the nodes that much of the decision-making takes place, where the contents of lymph are examined and the body decides how to respond. As lymph moves through its quiet network of vessels, it does not simply travel from one end of the body to the other without interruption. Along its route, it is guided through a series of small but highly organized structures that serve as points of inspection. These are the lymph nodes, and they are placed in strategic locations throughout the body, forming a kind of distributed system of checkpoints. Their presence turns the lymphatic system from a simple transport network into something far more active and responsive. It helps to think of lymph nodes not as isolated objects, but as part of a larger pattern. They are positioned in clusters in areas where fluid from large regions of the body is likely to pass. The neck, the armpits, the chest, the abdomen, and the groin all contain groups of these nodes. Each cluster receives lymph from specific areas, allowing the body to monitor different regions in a somewhat organized way. Fluid from the arm will tend to pass through nodes in the armpit. Fluid from the head and neck will move through nodes in those regions. This arrangement is not random. It ensures that what happens in one part of the body can be assessed locally before anything spread further. A lymph node itself is relatively small, often no larger than a bean. On the outside, it is enclosed in a thin capsule of connective tissue, giving it a defined shape and a slight firmness. Inside, however, the structure becomes more complex. The interior is divided into regions where different types of immune cells reside. There are areas rich in B lymphocytes, areas where T lymphocytes are more concentrated, and spaces where other supporting cells help coordinate immune responses. This internal organization allows the node to perform its filtering role with a degree of efficiency that would not be possible in a simple, undifferentiated structure. Lymph enters a node through several small vessels on one side. These are called afferent lymphatic vessels, and they bring fluid from the surrounding tissues. The lymph does not pass straight through. Instead, it is directed into a system of channels within the node, sometimes described as sinuses. These spaces slow the flow of fluid, spreading it out and exposing it to the cells that line the node. This slowing is important. If lymph moved too quickly, there would be little opportunity for anything within it to be examined. As the lymph passes through these internal channels, it encounters a variety of immune cells. Some of these cells are fixed in place, forming a kind of living filter. Others are more mobile, able to move within the node and interact with what they find. Macrophages are among the first to engage with the contents of the lymph. These cells are capable of engulfing and breaking down particles such as bacteria, cellular debris, and other foreign material. They act as a first line of inspection, removing what they can and presenting fragments of it to other immune cells. The presence of these macrophages is one of the reasons lymph nodes can trap pathogens. When bacteria or viruses are carried into a node, they are not simply allowed to pass through. They are caught, processed, and examined. This helps prevent the spread of infection and allows the immune system to begin responding at a relatively early stage. Beyond the macrophages, lymphocytes play a central role in what happens inside the node. B cells and T cells are both present, but they serve different functions. B cells are responsible for producing antibodies, which are proteins that can bind to specific targets, marking them for destruction or neutralizing them directly. T cells, on the other hand, can recognize infected or abnormal cells and either help coordinate the immune response or act directly to eliminate those cells. When lymph-carrying foreign material enters a node, these lymphocytes may be activated. This activation is not immediate or automatic. It depends on the recognition of specific molecular patterns. If a B cell encounters a fragment of a pathogen that matches its receptors, it can begin to multiply and differentiate into cells that produce antibodies. Similarly, T cells can be activated when they recognize specific signals presented by other immune cells. This process of activation and expansion is what turns a quiet lymph node into a busy centre of immune activity. This increase in activity is often what leads to the swelling of lymph nodes during infection. As lymphocytes multiply and the node becomes more active, it can enlarge and become tender. This is a visible and sometimes uncomfortable sign that the body is responding to a problem. It is not the node itself that is harmful, but rather the increased activity within it. The swelling reflects the work being done, not a failure of the system. After passing through the internal structure of the node, the filtered lymph exits through a different vessel, called an efferent lymphatic vessel. This vessel carries the lymph away from the node and toward the next stage of its journey. In many cases, lymph will pass through several nodes in sequence before reaching the larger lymphatic trunks and ducts. Each node adds another layer of inspection, increasing the likelihood that anything harmful will be detected and addressed. The idea of multiple checkpoints is important. A single node might miss something, but a series of nodes provides redundancy. This layered approach makes the system more reliable. It is similar to having multiple stages of screening rather than relying on a single pass. The body does not assume that one inspection is enough. It builds in repetition and reinforcement. It is also worth noting that lymph nodes are not isolated from the rest of the immune system. They are connected through the movement of cells and signals. When an immune response begins in one node, it can influence activity elsewhere. Cells activated in one location can travel to others, spreading the response. This coordination allows the body to respond to local problems while also preparing for wider challenges. The filtering function of lymph nodes is not limited to pathogens. They also handle normal cellular turnover. Cells in the body are constantly being replaced. Old or damaged cells break down, releasing components that need to be cleared. Lymph nodes help manage this process by filtering out cellular debris and ensuring that it does not accumulate in the tissues or circulate unchecked. This contributes to the general maintenance of the body's internal environment. In addition to their role in defense and cleanup, lymph nodes also play a part in tolerance. The immune system must be able to distinguish between what belongs to the body and what does not. This is not always a simple task, given the complexity of the molecules involved. Within lymph nodes, mechanisms exist to help prevent the immune system from attacking the body's own tissues. Cells that react too strongly to normal components can be controlled or eliminated. This helps maintain a balance between vigilance and restraint. The placement of lymph nodes reflects both anatomical and functional considerations. In areas where the body is more exposed to potential entry points for pathogens, such as the head and neck or the digestive tract, nodes are more densely arranged. In other areas, they are spaced in a way that still allows for effective monitoring without unnecessary duplication. This distribution ensures that most regions of the body are covered without creating excessive concentration in any one place. There is also a relationship between lymph nodes and the pathways of disease spread. Because lymphatic vessels can carry cells as well as fluid, certain types of cancer can use these pathways to move from one part of the body to another. Cancer cells that enter lymphatic vessels may become trapped in lymph nodes, where they can begin to grow. This is why the examination of lymph nodes is often part of the assessment of cancer. The presence or absence of cancer cells in nodes can provide information about how far a disease has progressed. This aspect of lymph nodes highlights their dual role. On one hand, they act as barriers, trapping and filtering harmful material. On the other hand, they can become sites where certain processes continue. This does not mean the system is flawed. It reflects the complexity of biological systems, where structures designed for one purpose can also be involved in other processes under different conditions. The interaction between lymph nodes and the rest of the lymphatic system is continuous. Lymph flows in, is filtered, and flows out. Cells enter and leave. Signals are generated and transmitted. This ongoing activity does not stop when there is no obvious infection. Even in a healthy state, lymph nodes are active, processing normal levels of material and maintaining readiness for potential challenges. It is also interesting to consider how little attention this process receives under normal conditions. Most people are unaware of their lymph nodes unless they become enlarged or tender, yet these structures are constantly engaged in work that supports overall health. They are part of the reason why small infections can be contained and resolved without becoming serious. They help prevent the accumulation of unwanted material. They contribute to the regulation of immune responses. The term checkpoint captures the essence of what lymph nodes do, but it can be expanded slightly. They are not just points where fluid is checked, they are places where decisions are made. Based on what is found in the lymph, the immune system can choose to respond, to ignore, or to regulate its activity. This decision-making process is not conscious, of course, but it is highly structured and guided by complex interactions between cells and molecules. The efficiency of this system depends on the proper functioning of both the vessels and the nodes. If lymphatic vessels do not carry fluid effectively, the nodes will not receive the information they need. If the nodes themselves are damaged or overwhelmed, their ability to filter and respond will be reduced. This interdependence means that the health of the lymphatic system as a whole is important for maintaining balance. There is also a subtle relationship between the lymphatic system and the passage of time in the body. As cells age and are replaced, as tissues experience minor injuries and repairs, as the immune system encounters new challenges, the lymph nodes are involved in processing the results. They are part of the ongoing maintenance that allows the body to adapt and continue functioning over long periods. From a practical perspective, understanding lymph nodes can help explain everyday experiences. A sore throat followed by tender nodes in the neck is a sign that lymph from the throat region is being filtered and that an immune response is underway. Swelling in the armpit after a cut on the hand reflects the movement of lymph from the arm through nearby nodes. These are not random occurrences, they are direct consequences of the pathways and functions we have been discussing. It is also worth noting that not all lymph nodes are equally active at all times. Their activity depends on the conditions in the tissues they serve. Some nodes may be relatively quiet for long periods, while others are more frequently engaged. This variability is part of the system's efficiency. Resources are used where they are needed rather than being uniformly distributed regardless of circumstance. As lymph continues its journey beyond these checkpoints, it carries with it the results of this filtering process. Harmful materials may have been removed or neutralized. Immune cells may have been activated and set into motion. Signals may have been generated that influence responses elsewhere in the body. The fluid itself, now altered by its passage through the node, moves on toward the larger vessels and eventually back into the bloodstream. This transition leads naturally to the next aspect of the system, where the focus shifts from filtering and inspection to the role of the immune cells themselves. Because within these nodes and along the vessels there is a constant presence of cells dedicated to defense, and understanding how they operate adds another layer to the picture of how the body protects itself. Inside the lymphatic system, the fluid may be quiet and the vessels may move without much force, but the activity within them is far from passive. Moving through this network, and often stationed at key points along the way, are cells whose entire purpose is to notice, interpret, and respond to what does not belong. These are the white blood cells, and within the lymphatic system they are not simply drifting along. They are working constantly whether anything dramatic is happening or not. It is easy to imagine the immune system as something that only activates during illness, as if it spends most of its time resting and then suddenly springs into action when needed. In reality, it is always active at some level. Even when you feel completely well, immune cells are moving through tissues, entering lymphatic vessels, passing through lymph nodes, and returning to circulation. They are sampling the environment, collecting information, and maintaining a baseline awareness of what is happening throughout the body. White blood cells, or leukocytes, are not all the same. They include several types, each with its own role. Some are quick responders that deal with immediate threats. Others are more specialized, capable of recognizing specific targets, and remembering them for the future. Within the lymphatic system, a few of these types play particularly important roles. Lymphocytes, which include B cells and T cells, are central to the more targeted aspects of immune defense. Macrophages and dendritic cells are also essential, acting as collectors and presenters of information. When fluid becomes lymph and enters the lymphatic vessels, it carries with it whatever was present in the surrounding tissue. This may include harmless substances, normal cellular byproducts, or potentially harmful organisms. White blood cells use this flow as a source of information. They are not waiting for a signal to begin their work. They are already engaged in it, moving through the system and interacting with what they encounter. Macrophages are among the first to act. Their role is often described as one of cleanup, but that description does not fully capture what they do. They're capable of engulfing particles, including bacteria, fragments of damaged cells, and other debris. This process, known as phagocytosis, allows them to remove material that should not remain in circulation. But macrophages do more than simply remove unwanted substances. After engulfing and breaking down these materials, they can display pieces of them on their surface. These displayed fragments act as signals to other immune cells, indicating what has been found. Dendritic cells perform a similar function, though they are particularly efficient at collecting and presenting information. They can capture material in the tissues and then travel through lymphatic vessels to reach lymph nodes. Once there, they interact with lymphocytes, especially T cells, presenting the fragments they have collected. This interaction is one of the key moments in the initiation of a more specific immune response. T cells are highly selective. Each T cell is capable of recognizing a particular pattern. Most of the time, they do not encounter anything that matches their receptors closely enough to trigger a response. But when a dendritic cell presents a fragment that matches a T cell's recognition pattern, that T cell can become activated. This activation leads to a series of changes. The cell begins to multiply, creating many copies of itself. These copies can then carry out specific functions, such as helping coordinate other immune cells or directly targeting infected or abnormal cells. B cells operate in a related but distinct way. They're responsible for producing antibodies, which are proteins that can bind to specific targets. When a B cell encounters a substance that matches its receptors, it can also become activated, often with the assistance of helper T cells. Once activated, B cells can differentiate into plasma cells, which produce large amounts of antibodies. These antibodies circulate through the body, binding to their targets and marking them for destruction or neutralization. The interaction between these different types of cells is not random. It is highly organized, particularly within lymph nodes. As lymph passes through a node, it brings with it a sample of what is present in the tissues. Macrophages and dendritic cells capture and process this material. They then present it to lymphocytes in specific regions of the node. B cells and T cells move within these regions, increasing the likelihood that the right cell will encounter the right signal. This arrangement allows the immune system to respond with precision. Instead of reacting broadly to any foreign material, it can identify specific threats and tailor its response accordingly. This specificity is one of the reasons the immune system is so effective. It can distinguish between different types of pathogens and respond in ways that are appropriate to each one. Another important feature of this system is memory. Once a lymphocyte has been activated by a particular target, some of the cells it produces become memory cells. These cells remain in the body for long periods, sometimes for years or even decades. If the same target appears again, these memory cells can respond more quickly and more effectively than before. This is the basis of long-term immunity. The lymphatic system plays a key role in this process by providing the environment where these initial interactions and activations occur. The presence of memory cells means that the immune system is not starting from scratch each time it encounters a familiar threat. It is building a record of past encounters, using that information to improve future responses. This ability to learn and adapt is one of the defining features of the immune system, and it depends heavily on the interactions that take place within lymphatic structures. It is also important to consider how the immune system avoids reacting to the body's own tissues. Given the vast number of molecules present within the body, there is a risk that immune cells could mistakenly identify normal components as threats. To prevent this, several mechanisms are in place. During their development, many lymphocytes that strongly react to self-components are eliminated or altered. Within lymph nodes and other lymphatic tissues, additional regulatory processes help maintain this balance. Certain cells act to suppress inappropriate responses, ensuring that the immune system remains focused on genuine threats. This balance between activity and restraint is delicate. Too little response can allow infections to spread. Too much or misdirected response can lead to damage of the body's own tissues. The lymphatic system provides a controlled environment where these responses can be initiated and regulated. It is not simply a site of activation, but also of decision-making. The movement of white blood cells through the lymphatic system is continuous. Cells enter tissues from the bloodstream, perform their functions, and then often enter lymphatic vessels to return to circulation. This movement allows them to patrol different areas, increasing the likelihood that they will encounter anything unusual. It also allows information gathered in one location to be shared with other parts of the immune system. This circulation of immune cells is supported by chemical signals. Cells release molecules that attract or guide other cells, directing them to where they're needed. Within lymph nodes, these signals help organize the movement of cells, bringing together those that need to interact. This coordination is essential for the efficiency of the immune response. It is also worth noting that the immune system operates on multiple timescales. Some responses are immediate, involving cells that can act quickly to contain a problem. Others take longer to develop, involving the activation and expansion of specific lymphocytes. The lymphatic system supports both types of responses by providing routes for rapid movement as well as environments for more complex interactions. In everyday life, the activity of white blood cells within the lymphatic system is rarely noticed. It does not produce a sensation that can be easily felt. Even during infection, the most noticeable effects are often indirect, such as swelling of lymph nodes or general symptoms like fatigue or fever. Yet beneath these signs, a detailed and coordinated process is taking place. When a pathogen enters the body, it may be carried in lymph to a nearby node. There, it is captured and presented to lymphocytes. If the appropriate cells are present, they become activated. These cells multiply, producing a population capable of addressing the threat. Some remain in the node, while others leave and travel to the site of infection. Antibodies may be produced and released into circulation. Signals are sent that influence other parts of the immune system. All of this can occur without any conscious awareness. The effectiveness of this process depends on the integrity of the lymphatic system. If lymphatic vessels are damaged or blocked, the movement of immune cells and the transport of information can be disrupted. If lymph nodes are removed or impaired, the local filtering and coordination of immune responses can be affected. This is one of the reasons why certain medical treatments that involve lymph nodes require careful consideration. The role of white blood cells in the lymphatic system also extends to long-term health. By continuously monitoring tissues and responding to changes, they help maintain stability. They remove damaged cells, limit the spread of infections, and contribute to the repair of tissues. Their activity is part of the ongoing maintenance that keeps the body functioning smoothly. It is interesting to consider how much of this work is done without interruption. Even during sleep, when many conscious processes slow down, immune cells continue to move and interact. The lymphatic system continues to carry fluid, and lymph nodes continue to filter and respond. The body does not pause its defenses simply because the mind is at rest. This continuous activity reflects the nature of the environment in which the body exists. It is not isolated. It is constantly exposed to external influences, from microorganisms to physical stresses. The immune system, supported by the lymphatic network, provides a way to manage these influences, allowing the body to adapt and remain stable. As the lymphatic system carries lymph through its vessels and nodes, the presence of white blood cells ensures that this movement is not just about transport, but about awareness. The fluid becomes a medium through which information is gathered and shared. The vessels become routes for cells that need to travel. The nodes become centers where decisions are made. From this perspective, the lymphatic system can be seen as a combination of pathways and interactions. The pathways allow movement, while the interactions give that movement meaning. Without the cells, the system would simply move fluid. Without the vessels, the cells would lack an efficient way to communicate and respond. Together they form a network that supports both the physical and defensive needs of the body. As lymph continues its journey beyond the nodes, carrying with it the results of these interactions, it moves toward the larger vessels that will return it to the bloodstream. But before reaching that final stage, it is worth considering another aspect of this system, one that relates to how the body manages excess fluid and waste on a broader scale, ensuring that the environment around cells remains balanced and functional. If you were to pause for a moment and imagine what happens inside your body over the course of a single day, the picture would not be still or quiet in the way it might first seem. Cells are constantly taking in nutrients, using them, and releasing byproducts. Blood is delivering and collecting. Tiny exchanges are happening in every tissue every second. With all of that activity, one simple question naturally follows. Where does everything go once it has been used? The answer is not handled by a single system working alone. The kidneys filter the blood. The lungs remove carbon dioxide. The liver processes and transforms substances. But there is another layer of cleanup happening in the background, one that deals with what accumulates outside the bloodstream in the spaces between cells. That responsibility belongs largely to the lymphatic system, and it is often described as a form of drainage, though that word only begins to capture what is happening. The idea of drainage may bring to mind something mechanical, like pipes clearing away water after a storm. In the body, the process is more gradual and more integrated. It begins with the same exchange that allows cells to receive what they need. Fluid leaves the capillaries, carrying nutrients into the tissues. Cells take what they need and release what they no longer require. Some of that fluid returns directly to the bloodstream, but a portion remains in the tissue spaces. The remaining fluid contains a mixture of water, dissolved substances, proteins, and cellular byproducts. If this fluid were left in place, it would begin to accumulate. The spaces between cells would become crowded. The balance of pressure and concentration that allows substances to move efficiently would be disrupted. Cells would not function as effectively, and tissues would begin to swell. The body cannot allow that to happen, and so the lymphatic system steps in as a quiet but persistent solution. The lymphatic capillaries act as the first stage of this drainage process. Their structure allows them to take in excess fluid from the surrounding tissues. They do not pull it in with force. Instead, they respond to changes in pressure. When fluid builds up outside them, the tiny overlapping cells that form their walls open slightly, allowing the fluid to enter. Once inside, the pressure within the vessel helps close those openings, preventing the fluid from leaking back out. This creates a one-way entry, ensuring that excess fluid moves into the lymphatic system rather than remaining in the tissues. As this fluid becomes lymph and begins its journey through the lymphatic vessels, it carries with it more than just water. It contains proteins that could not easily return to the bloodstream on their own. It contains fragments of cells that have been broken down and need to be cleared. It may contain bacteria, viruses, or other foreign materials that have entered the tissues. It also carries various signaling molecules that reflect what has been happening in the local environment. This mixture makes lymph an important part of the body's waste management system. But it is not waste in the same sense as what is filtered by the kidneys. It is a fluid that holds both useful and unwanted materials, and its movement allows the body to sort and handle these components properly. Some substances will be returned to circulation, others will be removed or broken down. The process is not simply about disposal, it is about maintaining balance. As lymph moves through the vessels, it is guided toward lymph nodes, where filtering takes place. This filtering is not limited to identifying pathogens. It also involves removing cellular debris and managing the contents of the fluid so that what eventually returns to the bloodstream is appropriate for circulation. In this way, the lymphatic system contributes to the cleanliness of the internal environment. The idea of cleanliness in this context is not about sterility. The body is not a sealed system free of all foreign material. Instead, it is about maintaining conditions that allow cells to function properly. Excess fluid must be removed. Proteins must be returned to circulation. Debris must be cleared. The lymphatic system helps achieve this by providing a pathway for materials that would otherwise remain in the tissue spaces. One of the most visible consequences of disrupted lymphatic drainage is swelling. When the flow of lymph is impaired, fluid can accumulate in the tissues. This condition, known as edema, or more specifically in some cases lymphedema, reflects the importance of the drainage process. The swelling is not just an increase in water, it often includes proteins and other substances that have been trapped in the tissues. This can affect the function of the affected area, making movement more difficult and altering the normal balance of the environment around cells. The causes of impaired drainage can vary. It may result from damage to lymphatic vessels, removal of lymph nodes during medical procedures, infection, or other conditions that affect the flow of lymph. Regardless of the cause, the underlying issue is the same. Fluid that should be collected and returned is instead remaining in the tissues. This highlights how essential the lymphatic system is for maintaining normal fluid levels. The movement of lymph through the vessels is slow compared to the flow of blood. This slower pace allows time for filtering and processing, but it also means that the system depends heavily on external factors to keep things moving. Muscle activity is one of the most important of these factors. When muscles contract, they compress nearby lymphatic vessels, pushing the fluid forward. Valves within the vessels ensure that this movement is directed in one direction. Breathing also contributes to the drainage process. Changes in pressure within the chest during inhalation and exhalation help draw lymph toward the central vessels. Even subtle movements such as shifting position or stretching can influence the flow. This is why prolonged immobility can lead to increased fluid retention. Without regular movement, the assistance normally provided by muscles and pressure changes is reduced, and lymph may move more slowly. The relationship between movement and lymphatic drainage is a practical example of how different systems in the body support one another. The muscular system, which is often associated with movement and strength, also plays a role in fluid balance. The respiratory system, through the act of breathing, contributes to circulation beyond the lungs. These connections allow the body to use existing processes to support multiple functions at once. Another aspect of lymphatic drainage involves the handling of larger molecules, particularly proteins. When proteins leak into the tissue spaces, they cannot easily re-enter the blood vessels due to their size. If they were to remain in the tissues, they would draw additional water into those spaces, increasing swelling. The lymphatic system collects these proteins and returns them to the bloodstream, helping maintain the proper balance of fluid and solutes. This role in protein recovery is one of the reasons the lymphatic system is so important for maintaining stable conditions in the body. It is not simply removing excess water, it is managing the composition of the fluid in the tissues, ensuring that substances are where they should be. This contributes to the overall efficiency of nutrient exchange and waste removal at the cellular level. The drainage function of the lymphatic system also extends to the removal of byproducts from cellular activity. Cells produce various substances as they carry out their functions. Some of these are small and easily handled by the bloodstream. Others are larger or more complex and require the lymphatic system for transport. By collecting these materials, the lymphatic system helps prevent their accumulation and ensures that they can be processed or eliminated appropriately. It is interesting to consider how this process operates continuously without direct awareness. There is no sensation associated with the movement of lymph under normal conditions. There is no signal that tells you when excess fluid is being collected. or when proteins are being returned to circulation. The system works quietly, maintaining balance without drawing attention to itself. This quiet operation is one of the reasons it is often overlooked. People tend to notice systems that produce clear signals or sensations. The lymphatic system, by contrast, does its work in the background. Its importance becomes more apparent when something goes wrong, but under normal conditions it remains largely unnoticed. The concept of great drainage captures the scale of what is happening. Over the course of a day, a significant volume of fluid is moved through the lymphatic system. This is not a minor process. It is a major component of how the body maintains its internal environment. The fact that it operates without constant attention is a reflection of how well it is integrated into the body's overall function. As lymph continues its journey, it eventually reaches the larger vessels and ducts that will return it to the bloodstream. By this point, much of the filtering and processing has already occurred. The fluid has been collected, inspected, and adjusted. What returns to the blood is part of a balance system, contributing to the stability that allows the body to function effectively. The return of lymph to the bloodstream completes a cycle that began with the movement of fluid out of the capillaries. This cycle is essential for maintaining the proper distribution of fluid and substances throughout the body. It allows for constant exchange without allowing imbalance to develop. From a broader perspective, the lymphatic system can be seen as part of the body's ongoing effort to manage the consequences of activity. Cells do not operate in isolation. Their work creates changes in the environment around them. The lymphatic system helps manage those changes, ensuring that the environment remains suitable for continued function. As we move forward, it becomes useful to explore how this system connects with other aspects of the body's function, particularly in areas where it plays a role beyond drainage and waste removal. One of these areas involves the absorption and transport of certain nutrients, which adds another layer to the understanding of how the lymphatic system contributes to overall health. Most people do not think about the lymphatic system while eating dinner, and that is probably for the best. A meal should not require a running commentary on digestion, molecule transport, and intestinal anatomy, unless one has chosen a very unusual dinner party. Even so, one of the most important jobs of the lymphatic system begins not in the neck, armpit, or groin, where people often notice swollen nodes, but deep in the small intestine, where the body is sorting through the useful parts of food and deciding how to move them into circulation. This is one of the more surprising parts of the lymphatic story. Up to this point, it is fairly easy to think of the system as a quiet drainage network, picking up excess fluid from tissues, carrying it through vessels, passing it through nodes, and returning it to the bloodstream after a careful inspection. That picture is true, but it is incomplete. The lymphatic system is not only about cleanup, it also helps with delivery. In particular, it plays a crucial role in absorbing and transporting certain dietary fats. That means the system is involved not just in waste handling and immune defense, but in nutrition itself. To understand why fats take this special route, it helps to begin with the basic challenge they present. The body needs fat. It needs it for energy storage, for cell membranes, for hormone production, for insulation, and for a number of other functions that are quietly important even if they do not sound glamorous. But fats are chemically different from many other nutrients. They do not mix easily with water, and the body, for all its complexity, is still largely a watery environment. Blood plasma is watery, tissue fluid is watery, digestive juices are watery. So moving fat through the body requires some extra planning. When you eat carbohydrates, they are eventually broken down into smaller sugars that can be absorbed relatively directly into blood vessels in the small intestine. Amino acids from proteins also pass rather straightforwardly into the blood. Fats are more complicated. They must first be broken apart, then gathered into forms that can survive the watery surroundings of the gut, then absorbed by intestinal cells, then repackaged again into transportable particles. And once that is done, many of them do not enter the blood capillaries immediately. They enter the lymphatic system. That is the gut connection. let us slow that down and walk through it properly, because digestion has a way of sounding much more chaotic than it really is. When dietary fat arrives in the small intestine, it is usually in the form of large triglycerides, which are molecules made of glycerol attached to fatty acids. These large fat molecules are useful as stored energy, but they are too large and too chemically awkward to be absorbed as they are. The digestive system must first break them down. This process depends heavily on bile and digestive enzymes. Bile is produced by the liver and stored in the gallbladder. It is released into the small intestine when fatty food arrives. Bile does not digest fat in the same way an enzyme does. Instead, it helps emulsify fat, breaking large fat droplets into much smaller ones. This is a bit like turning one large lump of butter into many tiny droplets suspended in liquid. That matters because digestive enzymes work on surfaces. More surface area means more efficient digestion. The main fat-digesting enzymes, called lipases, then break triglycerides into smaller components, mainly fatty acids and monoglycerides. These products, along with bile salts, form tiny structures called micelles. Micelles are useful because they can move through the watery environment of the intestinal contents and bring the fat digestion products into contact with the cells lining the small intestine. Those lining cells, called enterocytes, are the next key step in the story. They cover the inner surface of the small intestine, which is folded and lined with finger-like projections called villi. These villi greatly increase the surface area available for absorption, and on the surface of the enterocytes themselves are even tinier structures called microvilli, which increase that area even further. The intestine is, in effect, a masterclass in not wasting space. Inside each villus are tiny blood capillaries and, importantly for our purposes, a small lymphatic vessel called a lacteal. The lacteal is where the lymphatic system enters the digestive conversation in a very direct way. Once the products of fat digestion reach the surface of the enterocytes, they move into the cells. But they do not remain in their broken apart form for long. Inside the enterocytes, many of these fatty acids and monoglycerides are reassembled into triglycerides. Then they are packaged together with cholesterol, phospholipids, and proteins into larger particles called kilomicrons. Kilomicrons are clever little transport packages. They allow fats to travel through watery environments without simply clumping together uselessly. But they are also relatively large compared with the kinds of molecules that can pass directly into the blood capillaries of the villi. This is one reason they take a different route. Instead of entering the bloodstream immediately, chylomicrons pass into the lacteals, those specialized lymphatic capillaries inside the villi. Once inside the lacteals, they are part of the lymphatic system. The lymph carrying these fat-rich particles becomes milky in appearance. This milky lymph is called chyle. It is one of the more visually distinctive forms of lymph, and it reflects just how rich it is in absorbed dietary fat. So at this point, the fats from your meal have been digested, absorbed into intestinal cells, repackaged into chylomicrons, and sent into lymphatic vessels rather than directly into blood. From there, they travel through the lymphatic network, eventually reaching larger lymphatic vessels and finally the thoracic duct, which empties into a large vein near the base of the neck. Only then do these fats enter the bloodstream in a substantial way, ready to be delivered to tissues around the body. This detour is not accidental. It is a functional choice made by the body. The lymphatic system offers a route well suited to transporting these larger fat-rich particles. If all of this had to happen through the ordinary blood capillaries of the intestine, the process would be less efficient and more limited. The lacteals provide a more accommodating entry point for these particles, and the lymphatic route allows them to move gradually toward the circulation. There is something satisfying about that arrangement. The lymphatic system, which we first met as a collector of excess tissue fluid and a partner in immune defense, turns out also to be the body's special transport line for dietary fats. It is not only tidying up after the rest of the body, it is helping deliver one of the major nutrient classes that make life possible. It also means that after a fatty meal, the lymphatic system is especially active in a very specific way. The intestine is not simply passing nutrients into blood and moving on. It is engaging a different network for a different type of cargo. The blood and lymphatic systems are cooperating, but they are not doing identical jobs. This helps explain why the small intestine is such an important site of lymphatic anatomy. The villi are not just absorptive fingers with blood vessels inside them. They are little units of selective routing. Sugars and amino acids mostly go one way. Large fat-rich particles go another. The gut does not merely absorb, it sorts. There is also a broader physiological reason this matters. When chylomicrons enter the bloodstream after travelling through lymph, they can be delivered to tissues such as adipose tissue, muscle, and the liver. Enzymes in the bloodstream and on cell surfaces help release fatty acids from these particles so that tissues can use or store them. Adipose tissue stores excess energy. Muscle can use fatty acids as fuel. The liver can process remaining lipid components. So the lymphatic system is part of the path by which the body turns a meal into stored potential and active metabolism. This gives the lymphatic system a role in everyday energy balance that many people never learn about. If you eat a meal containing fat, and most meals do, then the lymphatic system is involved in handling part of that meal. Not in a vague symbolic sense. Quite literally, it is carrying the products of digestion. It is also worth noticing how beautifully this reflects the body's talent for specialization. Different nutrients do not all have to follow the same rule. The body does not insist on one transport method for everything. It adapts the route to the cargo. Small, water-friendly molecules can enter blood capillaries directly. Larger packaged lipids travel by lymph. Biology often solves complexity by allowing parallel systems to share the workload. The intestine itself is a remarkable place for this kind of coordination. It is not only digesting and absorbing food, but also balancing immune surveillance, barrier protection, and nutrient routing all at once. The lymphatic system plays into all of these. The gut is constantly exposed to material from the outside world, much of it harmless, some of it potentially dangerous. That means the lymphatic structures associated with the digestive tract do more than absorb fats. They also contribute to immune monitoring, helping the body distinguish between nutrients, normal microbes, and threats. This is one reason the digestive tract contains so much lymphoid tissue. The gut is not just a tube for food. It is a major border between the body and the outside environment, and borders, biologically speaking, always attract security infrastructure. So when fats are absorbed into lacteals, this is happening in a region already full of immune attention. The lymphatic system in the gut is therefore doing two things at once. It is helping move nutritional cargo, and it is participating in surveillance. This overlap is typical of the body. One structure rarely has only one reason to exist. Some medical conditions make the gut connection especially obvious. Disorders that impair lymphatic drainage from the intestine can interfere with fat absorption. Certain diseases can cause leakage of lymph into the intestines or elsewhere, leading to nutritional problems, swelling, or other complications. In these cases, the usually invisible role of intestinal lymphatics becomes very visible indeed. A system that usually works quietly in the background suddenly reveals how central it was all along. There is also a small but useful lesson here about how the body handles substances based not on our everyday categories, but on chemistry and structure. We may think of food as breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, regrettable midnight choice, and so on. The body is less interested in the occasion, and more interested in molecular properties. Can this dissolve in water? Can this fit through a capillary wall? Does this need packaging? Does this require bile? Does this need a lymphatic route? The body is very practical that way, and fats, practical though they are, need some handling. Another interesting detail is that not all fat-related molecules follow exactly the same path. Shorter-chain fatty acids can sometimes enter the blood more directly, particularly through the portal circulation to the liver. But the larger long-chain fats, the ones most commonly emphasized in digestion, are the ones that depend most strongly on repackaging into chylomicrons and transport through the lymphatic system. So even within the category of fats, there is nuance. The body is fond of nuance even when textbooks try to rescue us by simplifying things. When you picture this now, you can almost trace the route in your mind. A meal is broken down in the intestine. Dietary fats are emulsified by bile and digested by lipases. Their components approach the intestinal lining inside micelles. They enter enterocytes. There they are rebuilt into triglycerides and packaged into kilomicrons. These kilomicrons enter lacteals in the villi. From there they travel with lymph, becoming part of chyle, move through lymphatic vessels, eventually reach the thoracic duct, and then enter the bloodstream near the heart. That is not a minor side road in physiology. That is a major nutrient pathway. There is something nicely humbling about the fact that this whole process can happen while you're doing something completely ordinary, like reading messages, washing dishes, or wondering whether you should have added more salt to the soup. Beneath all of that, the small intestine and lymphatic system are conducting a careful logistical operation involving emulsification, membrane transport, intracellular repackaging, lymphatic uptake, and gradual delivery to circulation. The body is absurdly competent while we're distracted by much smaller concerns. This digestive role of the lymphatic system also helps connect some of the earlier ideas we have discussed. The system is not just a network of return, it is also a pathway of selective movement. It carries fluid from tissues, yes, but it also carries fats from the intestine. It supports immune cell trafficking, yes, but it also participates in nutritional transport. It drains, it filters, it delivers. It is beginning to look less like a side system and more like one of the body's great support networks hiding in plain sight. And because it carries such important cargo, problems with lymphatic flow can have consequences beyond swelling alone. When intestinal lymphatics do not function well, nutritional status may suffer. Fats and fat-soluble vitamins can become harder to absorb properly. Energy balance and tissue maintenance may be affected. The impact can ripple outward, because lipids are not optional decorations in the body. They are part of membranes, hormones, signaling pathways, and stored fuel. A disruption in their handling is never trivial. At the same time, this route protects the bloodstream from receiving a sudden flood of large lipid particles directly from the gut capillaries. The lymphatic detour provides a smoother introduction of this material into circulation. Again, the body shows its preference for controlled transitions rather than abrupt ones. By now, the lymphatic system should feel much less like an afterthought. In the tissues, it collects excess fluid. In the nodes, it supports filtering and immune activation. In the intestine, it serves as a transport route for absorbed fats. It is not merely waiting around for swollen glands to make it relevant. It is involved in ordinary life every day, and every meal reminds that system of one more reason it exists. There is also a practical comfort in understanding this. The body does not only protect itself by fighting threats, it also protects itself by moving useful things the right way. Health is not just defense against danger, it is also successful transport, successful balance, successful handling of ordinary needs. The lymphatic system belongs to that quieter side of survival, where the goal is not dramatic rescue but steady function. So when we think of the gut and the lymphatic system together, we're really thinking about a partnership between digestion and circulation, between nutrition and transport, between the chemistry of food and the logistics of the body. One system breaks down, packages, and hands off. The other receives, carries, and returns that cargo to the bloodstream. And once you see that, the next question begins to arrive on its own. If the lymphatic system depends on smooth flow to collect fluid, filter it, and even move nutritional fats, what happens when that flow slows down, becomes blocked, or can no longer keep up with the demands placed on it? Most of the time, the lymphatic system is easiest to understand when it's working well. Fluid leaves the blood, enters the tissues, and is quietly collected again. Lymph moves through vessels, passes through nodes, and returns to the bloodstream without asking for applause. The body remains balanced, the spaces around cells remain manageable, and no one has much reason to think about what is happening beneath the skin. But as with many body systems, its importance becomes much easier to see when something interrupts the flow. When lymph does not move properly, the effects are often slow at first. There is no dramatic siren, no sharp signal that announces with theatrical timing that the drainage system has become compromised. Instead, there may be heaviness, tightness, swelling, a feeling that a limb is slightly fuller than usual, or the quiet realization that a ring, a shoe, or a sleeve no longer fits in quite the same way. These changes can be subtle in the beginning, but they reveal something important. The fluid that should have been collected and returned is starting to remain in the tissues. To understand why this happens, it helps to remember what the lymphatic system is actually dealing with. It is not only collecting spare water, it is also collecting proteins, cellular debris, immune cells, and other materials from the spaces between cells. When the system slows or becomes blocked, these substances can accumulate where they should not, and because proteins in particular tend to draw water toward them, the problem can build on itself. More protein in the tissue can lead to more fluid retention, and more retained fluid can lead to more swelling. This is one reason problems with lymphatic flow are not always simple or self-correcting. If a little extra fluid stayed in the tissues for a short time, perhaps the body could catch up once movement resumed or the temporary cause passed. But if the lymphatic pathways are damaged, obstructed, overwhelmed, or underdeveloped, the imbalance may persist. Over time, the tissue itself can begin to change. The swelling is no longer just a passing inconvenience, it becomes part of the local biology. The broad term for swelling caused by excess fluid in tissues is edema. There are many types of edema, and not all of them are caused by lymphatic problems. Swelling can result from heart failure, kidney disease, venous problems, inflammation, injury, medications, and other causes. But when the swelling is specifically due to impaired lymphatic drainage, the condition is called lymphedema. Lymphedema is, in simple terms, swelling caused by lymph that cannot drain properly. It often affects an arm or a leg, though it can occur in other regions as well. It may develop because the lymphatic vessels themselves are absent, abnormal, damaged, or blocked. It may also occur when lymph nodes have been removed or injured, reducing the system's ability to receive and process lymph from a particular region. The result is a kind of traffic problem with fluid. What normally moves onward begins to collect behind the obstruction. There are two major ways to think about lymphedema. One is primary lymphedema, where the problem arises because the lymphatic system did not develop normally. In these cases, a person may be born with too few lymphatic vessels that are too narrow, or nodes that are not functioning as they should. The condition might appear in infancy, adolescence, or adulthood, depending on the exact cause and severity. The system may have enough capacity for ordinary circumstances at first, and then begin to struggle later, when growth, hormonal changes, weight gain, infection, or injury place greater demands on it. The other major category is secondary lymphedema. This is more common, and it develops when a previously more normal lymphatic system is damaged by something that happens later. Surgery is a well-known cause, especially when lymph nodes are removed as part of cancer treatment. Radiation therapy can also damage lymphatic vessels and surrounding tissues, making flow more difficult. Infections can interfere with lymphatic drainage. Trauma can do the same. Certain cancers can block lymphatic routes directly by growing into or compressing them. In some parts of the world, parasitic infections are a major cause of lymphatic obstruction. So the reasons can vary, but the basic effect is similar. The flow slows, the route narrows, or the pathway is interrupted, and the fluid begins to remain behind. This is where it becomes important to remember that the lymphatic system is not powered by a large central pump. It relies on vessel structure, valves, tissue pressure, muscle movement, breathing and intact pathways. That makes it efficient, but it also means it is vulnerable to disruption. Remove a cluster of lymph nodes from the armpit, and the arm on that side may have fewer drainage options. Damage the tissues with radiation, and the local vessels may become scarred or less flexible. Keep a limb still for long periods, and the muscle-assisted movement of lymph is reduced. Add inflammation, extra body weight, or recurrent infection, and the burden increases further. The swelling of lymphedema often feels different from the temporary puffiness that follows a long flight or a hot day. Early on, it may still soften or improve with elevation, but over time it often becomes firmer. The skin may feel tight. The limb may feel heavy or uncomfortable. Clothing and jewellery may fit differently. There may be less flexibility in the joints if the swelling is significant. Some people describe a sense of fullness or dull pressure rather than pain exactly. Others feel fatigue in the affected limb, as though it takes more effort to carry it through the day. The reason this firmness can develop is that chronic lymphatic fluid buildup does more than add water. The retained proteins and the persistent local inflammation they can encourage begin to change the tissue. Fibrous material may increase. The skin and underlying tissues may thicken. What began as a fluid imbalance can slowly become a structural one. This is why early recognition and management matter. A swelling problem that is addressed early is often easier to control than one that has been left to shape the tissues over time. There is also an immune dimension to this, because lymphatic flow is involved in immune transport and tissue maintenance. Areas affected by lymphedema can become more vulnerable to infection. The skin may be stretched or altered. Local immune surveillance may not function as smoothly. Bacteria that enter through a small cut, insect bite, or crack in the skin may find a more favourable environment than they otherwise would. This is one reason people with lymphedema are often advised to protect the skin carefully, avoid injuries when possible, and respond promptly to signs of infection. One such infection is cellulitis, a bacterial infection of the skin and deeper tissues. In a limb with impaired lymphatic drainage, cellulitis can develop more easily and may in turn worsen the swelling further. This creates an unpleasant loop. Poor drainage increases infection risk, and infection increases inflammation, which can further impair drainage. The body does not enjoy these circular problems, and neither do the people living with them. Blockages in lymphatic flow do not always look the same, and they do not always involve an entire limb. Sometimes the obstruction is partial. Sometimes collateral pathways, smaller alternative routes, can compensate for a while. The body often tries to adapt. It may redirect flow through neighbouring vessels. It may depend more heavily on muscle movement and pressure changes, but adaptation has limits. If the demands exceed the remaining capacity, swelling begins to show. There is something quietly frustrating about that, because by the time visible swelling appears, the system may already have been straining for some time. A person may feel fine for months or years after surgery, and then gradually begin to notice changes. It is not that the lymphatic system suddenly became dramatic one morning. It is that the balance between fluid load and drainage capacity slowly shifted until the difference became noticeable. That balance is worth thinking about. Even a healthy lymphatic system is always working with a load. Fluid is always leaving blood capillaries, proteins are always moving, waste is always being generated, so lymphedema and similar conditions are not about a system that used to do nothing and now has to work. They're about a system that was always busy losing enough capacity that it can no longer keep up. The causes of temporary slowing can be milder and more familiar. If someone sits or stands in one position for a long time, the lack of muscle action can reduce lymph flow. If an injury causes inflammation, extra fluid may accumulate locally, increasing the workload for nearby lymphatic vessels. If a person is recovering from surgery and moving less than usual, there may be a temporary tendency towards swelling. In these cases, the body may recover once movement increases, inflammation settles, or healing progresses. The system catches up. But in more significant cases, catching up becomes harder. This is also why movement is so often part of management. The lymphatic system depends on physical motion far more than many people realise. Muscles compress vessels. Breathing helps draw fluid centrally. Changing position alters pressure. Gentle exercise can encourage lymph flow. None of this is magical, and it does not replace damaged vessels or missing nodes, but it can help the remaining system work more effectively. A walk, a stretch, a well-timed change of position, these things matter in a body that has built one of its fluid systems around movement. Compression is another important idea in the management of lymphatic swelling. Compression garments or bandaging can help support tissues and encourage fluid to move in directions where drainage is still possible. This does not mean squeezing a limb at random and hoping for the best. Proper compression is structured and usually guided by professionals who understand how pressure should be applied. Done well, it helps prevent fluid from collecting excessively in the tissues and supports the remaining lymphatic function. There are also specialised therapies, such as manual lymphatic drainage, which use gentle techniques to encourage lymph movement through available pathways. The goal is not to force the fluid violently through blocked vessels, which would be both ineffective and deeply rude to the tissues, but to support redirection and flow where possible. Skincare, exercise, compression, and careful monitoring often work together in management rather than any single method solving everything alone. What is striking about all of this is how consistent it is with the design of the lymphatic system itself. The system depends on pathways, valves, tissue pressures, motion, and local structure. So when it struggles, the solutions often involve supporting those same elements. Protect the skin because infection worsens drainage. Move the body because movement supports lymph flow. Use compression because pressure can influence fluid direction. Respect the anatomy because the system is a root problem as much as a fluid problem. There is also a psychological side to swelling that should not be overlooked. A limb that feels heavy, altered, or visibly different can affect comfort, confidence, and daily routine. It can change how clothing fits, how long walking feels manageable, or how a person thinks about movement. Because the lymphatic system is usually so hidden, problems with it can feel unexpectedly intrusive. A system most people have never thought about suddenly becomes part of every day. That can be tiring in ways that are not fully captured by measurements of circumference or fluid volume. And yet even here the body's logic still shows through. The swelling is not random, the heaviness is not arbitrary. These are signs that the usual return route has been interrupted. They are consequences of a system that normally prevents such accumulation with remarkable consistency. When the flow slows, the body reveals how much work had been quietly accomplished all along. It is also worth pointing out that not every enlarged lymph node and not every swollen area means lymphedema. A swollen node may simply reflect infection or inflammation. A puffy ankle may come from venous issues rather than lymphatic ones. A new swelling should always be assessed in its proper context. Biology enjoys overlapping symptoms, which keeps medicine humble. But once lymphatic causes are identified, the patterns begin to make sense. Regional swelling, heaviness, skin changes, a history of node removal, radiation, infection, trauma, or congenital differences. The story starts to align with the anatomy. The longer one looks at the lymphatic system, the clearer it becomes that flow is everything. The vessels do not exist to sit there looking anatomically correct. The nodes do not exist merely to be labelled in diagrams. The system works because fluid moves, because information moves, because immune cells move, because fats move, because waste moves. Slow that movement too much, and the consequences begin to gather. So when flow slows, the body does not simply become slightly less tidy, it becomes less balanced. Fluid remains where it should have been cleared. Proteins stay where they should have been returned. Tissue structure changes. Infection risk rises. Motion may become harder. The quiet support network turns from an invisible ally into a visible challenge. And that leads naturally to the next question. Because if the lymphatic system relies so much on motion, pressure changes, and ordinary physical activity to keep things moving, then what role do breathing, muscles, and daily movement play in supporting that flow when things are going well and when they are not? There is a certain kind of comfort in knowing that not everything in the body asks for attention. Some systems announce themselves clearly. The heart can be felt when it beats faster. The lungs make their presence known with every breath. Muscles speak when they are tired, or sore, or strong. But there are other systems that do not introduce themselves so directly. They do their work in the background, steady and consistent, without needing to be noticed in order to be effective. The lymphatic system belongs to that quieter group. Throughout the day, while thoughts come and go, while movements happen without much planning, while meals are eaten and forgotten, this system continues its work without interruption. Fluid leaves the bloodstream and enters the tissues. Cells use what they need and release what they do not. Tiny vessels open and close in response to pressure, collecting what remains. Lymph begins to form, carrying with it a record of what has been happening in the body. It moves slowly, guided not by a single strong pump, but by the gentle influence of motion. Muscles contract and vessels are pressed. Breathing shifts pressure, drawing fluid along its path. Small valves open and close, keeping everything moving in one direction. There is no urgency in the way it moves, but there is consistency. It does not rush, but it does not stop. As this fluid travels, it passes through places designed to look more closely at what it carries. Within those spaces, cells examine its contents, not with awareness in the way a person might look at something, but with a kind of biological recognition. They respond to patterns, to signals, to fragments that suggest whether something belongs or does not. Most of the time, nothing requires a strong reaction. The system remains calm, continuing its steady work. And when something does require attention, the response begins quietly there, without needing to involve the whole body all at once. At the same time, in another part of the body, the small intestine is working through the contents of a recent meal. Nutrients are being sorted. Sugars and amino acids move into the bloodstream more directly. Fats take a different path, entering delicate vessels within the lining of the intestine, becoming part of the lymphatic flow. They travel slowly, carried along with the rest of the lymph, eventually returning to the circulation in a controlled and measured way. So even in something as ordinary as eating, this system is involved. It is not separate from daily life. It is woven into it. There is also the quiet responsibility of balance. Fluid that leaves the bloodstream must be returned. Proteins that drift into tissue spaces must be recovered. Debris must be cleared. Without this steady removal, the environment around cells would gradually change in ways that make their work more difficult. But that change rarely happens because the system is there, continuously restoring what has shifted. Most of the time, none of this is felt. There is no sensation of lymph moving through vessels, no awareness of fluid being collected from the tissues, no signal that says the balance has been maintained once again. The absence of sensation is not an absence of activity. It is simply a sign that everything is working as it should. It is only when the flow is interrupted that the system becomes noticeable. When swelling appears, when a limb feels heavy, when something that once went unnoticed begins to demand attention, it becomes clear how much had been happening without awareness. The quiet work becomes visible only in its absence. But in a healthy state, the system continues without interruption. It adjusts to movement, to stillness, to changes in posture, to the rhythm of breathing. It adapts without needing direction. It supports without asking to be acknowledged. There is something reassuring in that. It means that even when attention is elsewhere, even when the day has been full or unfocused or uneven, there are processes continuing with a kind of steady reliability. Not perfect, not immune to difficulty, but consistent in their intention. The body is not waiting for instructions in every moment. It has built ways to care for itself, and now, As the pace of the day begins to settle, that work does not pause. If anything, the quieter state allows these processes to continue without interruption. Breathing slows, but it still guides the movement of fluid. Muscles relax, but small adjustments still occur. The lymphatic vessels continue to carry what they have collected, moving it along step by step. There is no need to direct it, no need to think through each pathway or imagine each vessel. The system does not depend on that kind of attention. It depends on its structure, on its design, on the simple fact that it has been built to function in this way. So as the body becomes more still, as the mind begins to step away from the details of the day, the lymphatic system remains what it has always been. A network beneath the surface, steady in its movement, careful in its collection, patient in its return. It does not rush, and it does not hesitate. It continues. And in that continuation, it quietly protects what does not need to be noticed, maintaining a balance that allows everything else to keep going as it should, even as awareness fades and rest begins to take its place.